Hello, I am Aisha.
And Paula, your cultural hybrid mental health therapist.
Here to explore unfiltered and heartfelt conversations on core issues
that affect us as human beings. Get ready for honest, captivating,
and real stories that take you on a journey to navigate your life
in the best possible way.
So grab a seat
and stay with us on this episode of
Do We Have Your Attention? Welcome back to our lovely listeners of the Do We Have Your Attention podcast. My name is Aisha, and with me is my beautiful, amazing co-host.
Hi.
What's your
Paula.
name? And yes, we're so happy to have you join us for today's episode. Today, we're talking about something so many of us struggle with, but don't always recognize: the urge to constantly please others.
Yep. Today, we would be unpacking the psychology behind people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we do it?
Mm-hmm.
How it affects our mental health, and what can we actually do to stop sacrificing ourselves at the expense of other people.
Wow.
But before we get into this, let's start with our feelings check-in. How are you feeling today, Aisha?
I'm feeling currently green, feeling calm, at peace, yellow, positive energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm here for that.
Yeah. What about you? How are you feeling?
I would say that I'm feeling nervous. So maybe like gray, but then also feeling happy and positive, excited for this conversation. So I would say a little bit of yellow too as well.
Okay. And thank you for sharing. And for our listeners, we would like to encourage you to also pause and check in with yourself. So how are you feeling in this moment? How are you feeling as you're about to listen to this episode? Because it's important for us to take a moment to reflect on our feelings.
Absolutely.
And considering the topic, you want to check in and reflect a little bit.
Absolutely. And to get us started as you're reflecting too as well, we're talking about the psychology behind people pleasing. So what is people pleasing? What's this buzzword that we hear so much nowadays, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
People pleasing comes from a very deep emotional need, often rooted in our upbringing or experiences that we've had in life. It can obviously affect our relationships. It can affect our self-esteem. It can affect how we view ourselves. But today we're going to be fully breaking that down, and hopefully we're able to provide just some good insights on how to stop being so focused on making everybody else happy to the extent of neglecting our own selves.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Paula. And just to dive into the topic so that our listeners can start taking some notes.
Yep.
And I'm sure that it's hitting close to home for some of them. Our first question for you would be, how would you describe the habit of people pleasing, and why do people feel the need to please others?
So I'm going to start by saying, my name is Paula, and I am a recovering people pleaser.
Nice to meet you, Paula.
I'm going to start by saying that, hi, my name is Paula, and I am a recovering people pleaser. And I say that with so much pride, with so much, with so much pride, grace, whatnot, because when I say that, this is just me this year.
Yeah.
The year before that, if we're having this conversation last year, this would have been very, very different. Because the essence of people pleasing, it really comes from this constant need to prioritize the needs and wants of other people over our own.
Yeah.
Even if it comes at the expense of our own well-being and our happiness as well. And
Agreed.
To a large extent, it can be because we are hoping to gain some type of approval. It can be because we're trying to avoid conflict, or we're trying to wave the white flag or sort of maintain peace. Or it can be because there's certain learned behavioral habits that we've been exposed to growing up that easily conditions us to see the needs of other people as the priority and not necessarily our own. I think to a large extent, the system in which we grew up in, and whether it's from a cultural system or even just a structural system, it's very much so about doing things for the approval of others. Whether it's the approval of your boss, the approval of your parents, the approval of your friends and whatnot, and not necessarily, we don't really emphasize enough enough what it means to actually have approval within oneself.
Ourselves. Wow.
So to a large extent, our deep emotional need then becomes something that is rooted in how it influences and affects other people. So our sense of self, our self-esteem, our sense of happiness, joy, validation, and whatnot now becomes a lot more influenced by what we're receiving from our outside world versus internally.
Yeah.
So to a large degree, we end up creating that habit of what it means to be a people pleaser. So of course, some of those habits look like difficulty saying no.
Yep.
You know how they say some people are like, yes, man. Yes. I don't ever say no. Literally. Rarely say
crying.
no.
Yeah.
A big one as well would obviously be low self-esteem, like I had mentioned. Fear of conflict too as well. Rarely disagreeing with people.
Yeah.
Someone who constantly apologizes, that's a very big one as well.
Yeah.
I think another one as well can be someone who is so afraid of rejection that they would rather not put themselves in a position to be rejected, or at least attempt to not put themselves in that position. Over committing to things, to people, over committing. I'm just laughing that for a reason. I see you laughing, but you're going to keep going and then I'll check in with you.
I'm just laughing, LOL.
Being so easily agreeable, I hate to say to some degree, that also kind of ties in with sort of being taken advantage of.
Yeah.
I think also people who are very anxious, who kind of deal with anxiety to some degree.
Yeah.
People who as well value praise from other people. People who take the blame even when it's not their fault.
Yep.
Or justifying other people's actions.
Yep.
But never really like taking the blame, but not justifying your own, but more so justifying other
never
people.
Reflecting.
And to some degree, a lack of self-awareness too as well. I think so. How about you? What would you say are habits of people pleasing and why are we so obsessed with it? Why is that such a conversation that's being had today?
Honestly, I feel like you've really answered the question. Like there's nothing else I would add. Just to summarize what you said, fear of rejection, low self-esteem. Conditioning is a big part because I do feel like you learn some of these things from your family or just like the community that you grew up in. And, you know, if you saw your parents pleasing others, you saw that that was a norm, you are automatically going to take that as a norm for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think that people obsess over it because, like you were saying, that's how they get their validation. That's how they've learned to be validated and accepted. So it's just something that they do unconsciously because they've learned that they get a response from that. Like, you know, if I overextend myself, if I avoid putting in myself in a situation where I would get rejected, right? I've learned consistently that I'm protecting myself in quotes. But of course, we've learned that some of our coping mechanisms are not always healthy and they just always give us an illusion of control. But what always happens is people always somehow find themselves in situations where they are rejected, where they are somehow always in chaotic relationships or relationships where there's always conflict, right? Everything always circles back. So that thing you think you're hiding, you're not really hiding it, right?
Yeah.
So I think you really answered the question and that's a good summary of
I
what
agree
you
with
shared.
I guess if we're sort of thinking too as well about this notion of why is this such an important topic of conversation, first thing that comes to my mind is quality of life. Like our quality of life is really, really influenced or highly influenced by our relationship itself.
Agreed.
The level of health that we're on, like we're at rather.
Agreed.
And I'm saying mental, emotional, physical, and emotional and mental, obviously in this case too as well. If a lot of that is being highly placed on other people and their needs and whatnot and not ours, then I don't believe our quality of life can really be what we can imagine it could be.
Yeah, because you're basically living life for other people. You're not living life for yourself.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. Imagine how exhausting it is.
It is. I know. I know.
Thank you for being vulnerable at the beginning. But I think that a lot of us have people-pleasing tendencies.
Yeah, and I want us to also be able to sort of have this conversation in a way where people who might be struggling with this are feeling hopeful about it. They're feeling optimistic about what are some certain things that they could possibly do, but then also different ways in which they can start to look at their own behaviors in a way in which they weren't really looking at it before. So I'm wondering for you, what would you say are some of the common root causes of people-pleasing behaviors? And are these things really traced back to our childhood or life experiences?
And my answer is yes, because everything you learn as a child follows you to your adulthood. I definitely think family dynamics play a huge part. If you grow up in an environment where love and approval was connected to pleasing other people, you're going to grow up thinking that that's what you should be doing to get that from other people. And then what happens is you start to learn your values and your beliefs based on their expectations, and you carry that belief into your adulthood. And that starts to reflect your various relationships. I think sometimes parents have some unrealistic high expectations of you. And you may feel compelled to kind of reach those expectations and kind of give into those expectations, knowing fully well that it may not 100% look like what their expectations are, but you're going to be so disappointed in yourself that you're going to strive to focus on that direction that they created for you, which is very chaotic and exhausting, like we're saying earlier. We also have like just trauma, like if you had a traumatic childhood, and traumatic childhood could also look like bullying, right?
That's so true.
I think bullying can create fear and a fear of rejection and conflict, and you're going to go through lengths to be liked. So sometimes I see that office spaces or work where you can see people just honestly being yes men, because they have this need to be liked. They have this need to always be seen by authority figures as validated and accepted by those authority figures. And a lot of times, if you trace it back, it's probably due to their own childhood trauma or like just them being bullied as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you make such a good point. I didn't even think about this, that when we're also thinking back to childhood, it's not necessarily just our family environment, it's church, it's school, it's friendships, early childhood friendships too as well, it's bullying as well. A lot of these things, because to a large extent, there's a big correlation between socialization and people pleasing. If you see a group of people in school who people typically look up to, as like look up to, or they think they're the popular kids,
the cool
or they
kids
dress this way, or they present one way or another, it's easy to want to also conform to some degree or morph one's personality to that degree. That's also some level of form of people pleasing. And I agree with you that a lot of it too as well obviously is rooted in trauma. And I would even say that not just rooted in trauma, but to some degree, people pleasing can be a response to trauma. It can be from a fight or flight or freeze or fawn perspective, where a lot of us to a large degree see, I would even say more so fawning. That sounds weird, but I think you get more
FAWN.
so fawning sounds, but that is it, because we're thinking about fight, flight, freeze. And fawn. So we're speaking about the fourth trauma response, where with fawning, rather, so to speak, it's a thing where we maintain our sense of self by seeking approval from others. Or we think that we're maintaining because it's the belief system, so to speak, around that the way in which we see ourselves is a way in which we're highly influenced by other people. But I have a question about the same common root causes of people pleasing. Do you think to a large extent we are aware that these are some of the behavioral traits or dysfunctional traits that we have? Do you think to a large extent a lot of these things, like you said, are trauma responses? And you know how we have certain responses that we're not fully aware of until we maybe start to do our own work and whatnot and build some level of self-esteem and awareness around it. Or do you see it as something that is almost like a survival tool in being able to function in society?
I think it can be both. I think people can be aware because obviously you're getting something back from it. So for the most part, so you can use it as a survival tool in that sense. But you know yourself. You know what happens when you're alone. You know what happens when you are interacting with these people. So I think to an extent, people can be aware that they're going out of their way to please people at the expense of themselves. But I also think that a lot of us kind of shape it as a survival tool. Like, this is something I have to do to survive in society. And because there's a lot of people experiencing this behavior, we may also start to normalize it like, well, it's not just me. You know, Paula at work also does it. There's a bunch of us engaging in this behavior. I've noticed some of my friends to engage in this behavior. So it must not be that bad, despite knowing how you're feeling internally or just how much work you know you have to put into it. So I think it just depends. But one thing I always tell my clients is everybody knows what they're doing. Let's just put it out there. Yes, some things are unconscious, but for the most part, everybody knows what they're doing.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you, I think to some degree, I'm obviously still very new on this journey of recovering from people pleasing. But then I would say, I think for myself, mine had heavily to do with obviously trauma.
Yeah.
But it also had heavily to do with like trauma in the sense where it's a protective factor.
Yeah.
But then also me believing that I needed to work hard to keep and maintain people's love.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you know how many times my therapist would be like, Paula, you don't have to work hard to maintain people's love. Paula, you don't have to work, like you don't have to earn these
people's
things that are so free and so
love.
accessible and everyone is deserving of to a large extent.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure it out where exactly it is rooted in the sense where the belief is if I don't do something, nothing would happen. If I don't present this way, if I don't say, if I don't say no, then to some degree there's a level of approval or love or whatnot. And I remember having a conversation with a client of mine who was planning something for their birthday. And I looked at him and I said, why does it seem like what you're planning for your birthday has to do with everybody else but you? And then he kind of goes and looks at me. And then he looks at me and is like, girl, you're not about to start with me today.
Right, not today.
We went down memory lane and it's like, oh, what did you do the previous year? And the previous year was kind of very similar, the same thing too as well. So he then goes, if I don't plan something, nothing would happen. And I don't want to put myself in a position where I would have to feel the disappointment of nothing happening. So I'm going to eventually just plan something. So we kind of went down this whole memory lane, right, of him starting to really ask himself these questions. And then he arrived at a point where he realized that a lot of initiation, so to speak, that comes from him, whether it's saying yes most of the time, whether it's ensuring that there's some level of, how do I put this?
People are always accommodated.
People are always, like, there's some level of accommodation that is being given towards people. He realized that the fear of having to see people review themselves to him was so scary. Like, review where they're truly at, where I'm truly at with you in this relationship, how you truly feel about me to a large extent, made it easier for him to be like, okay, I'm just going to allow myself be in control of a lot of these things. And I really resonated with that because I think to a large extent too as well, this notion that you have to work hard to maintain people's love, to maintain acceptance is, if you don't work hard, then you're going to have to really deal with the reality of the love between you and that person in the first place. So I think to a large extent, that's mine.
Yeah, but wouldn't that mean that your ideas of love and acceptance is, what's the word? What's
Conditional?
The word? Not conditional.
Contingent?
No, I don't remember the word. But
something.
Yeah, it's something. Transactional, rather. Oh my God, it didn't even start with a C. I'm so sorry. But wouldn't it mean that your ideas of love is transactional? That you have to...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, you're hitting the nail on the head, therapist.
My bad. I didn't need to go in that direction, but that's what it sounds like. But yeah, I can empathize with that because if we're tracing it back to someone's childhood, you probably had to always think about others, put other people's feelings first, put other people's needs first, or you saw your parents doing that. And he was getting results. But the thing about that is the results also had consequences. So if I think about my own life experiences and my parents, God bless them, they're very kind people. That is one big value I would always appreciate my parents for instilling in me. But I also feel like their kindness transitioned into people pleasing a little bit. In the sense that they didn't know how to say no certain times. They're always helping people, And I just say this to prove the point of, yes, I saw that they were doing good and it was bringing positive results. But I also saw the consequences of that. Having people in your house, you know, you can't even have peace and quiet sometimes. Your children are exposed to all these people. Just the stress of having to think of fending for these people. Because guess what? when people are receiving from you, they're not really thinking about you.
Oh, yeah.
They really aren't. They're just here to receive and receive and receive.
Oh,
so I know my parents and I, as the older I got, we'll have conversations relating to, we're feeding these people and giving them a house to stay. And sometimes people could not even buy as little as a banana to come home. Do you get? Like, there's people that are adults in this house and in this space, and I just didn't trust them enough to be responsible to even feed you children that were younger than them. Do you know how crazy that is? So there's still consequences to it, but not being able to say no. Because, I have this perception that I always have to be a good person. I have this perception of I always have to help people. You know, the cultural norms of women having to play this role of the perfect mother, perfect wife, and give into societal expectations. But also men too. You know, you have to provide, you have to do this, you have to do that. But you know, because there's still consequences of it. Deep down internally, you know. It's just that sometimes it's easier to ignore that part of you because what you're gaining from it, that validation is so strong. And nobody wants to sit there and feel insecure and reflect and be like, I don't feel good when people don't validate me. So it's so easy to ignore or deny that it's even there in the first place. Yeah.
And maybe even to some degree, there's an addictive aspect of it where like being addicted to our dysfunctional behaviors because we're accustomed to them, they're normalized. And to some degree, there's a difference between you having to patiently wait, and this is like mindfulness where there's a degree of you having to be present in the here and the now and allow things reveal themselves to you. And then you navigate it based off of your own personal boundaries versus you not having to put yourself in that position because to a large extent, the addictiveness of these dysfunctional behaviors is that you see glimpses here and there of people accepting you or people seeming like they like you or people, you being able to create peace or avoid conflict or whatnot that almost reinforces the need to stick to them in a way that is so self-sacrificing. The word self-sacrificing, as I was saying that, like in a way that's so self-sacrificing. And I think to a large extent, it kind of ties into our next question. So I'll let you ask that.
Which is, what are the short-term and long-term consequences of constantly prioritizing others' needs over yours?
That hits. I'm going to be honest.
I was like, damn. Even as I said it, I was like, yo.
I was like, whoa.
No, seriously, because even I said it, I was like,
Because if you really think about it, short-term, long-term consequences, both consequences regardless, because the short will eventually lead to the long.
Long, agreed.
But then of constantly, that's the key word there, the constant. And whenever I think about people pleasing, from what it felt like for me, like a hamster on a wheel. And like, you know how you're just like, keep going. You cannot stop. Because for you sort of develop this negative core belief that in order for you to be able to function or be functional or be accepted or have some sense of self or identity, that is that work, that constant hamster wheel feeling. And I really like that visualization because even the hamsters, remember, they get tired. Like they have moments where they literally are like, I need a break. Type of situation. But if we're saying that all of these things are so readily accessible and are free and we're all deserving of it, then why do we feel the need to put ourselves in these positions where at the expense of
our
own selves, there's a constant need to prioritize other people? And that's why the self-sacrificing came so heavily in mind, that a big consequence is that you're sacrificing yourself. And temporary how can we validation. Really think that there is value in others, but we don't have value in self? And we're not saying it's us versus others.
Wow, that's deep. That's deep.
Not what we're saying here. We're not saying, because the extreme is now being self-centered or being egocentric. But we're saying that if people are just as valuable and we're seeing value in others, then why shouldn't we see value in self? So to a large extent, a big consequence, of course, that comes up for me is the sacrifice that self has to go through. That is even unnecessary and not even needed. But then another big aspect of this as well, and all of this, of course, when we think about mental health challenges, a lot of it comes from stress. It comes from poor quality of life. It comes from worrying and anxiety. And if there's a constant illusion of having to please people, worry, depression, many, many other mental health challenges that we sort of struggle on a day-to-day basis are things that would easily come as a result of these things. But a big one as well that I guess I could say I'm still learning, and was a hard pill for me to swallow was that my sense of self and my sense of identity as well comes at a big sacrifice, is a big consequence as a result of this. And no matter what I did or didn't do, none of that was going to ever change how people were choosing to react to me, how people were choosing to love me, how people were choosing to treat me, how people were choosing to value me and whatnot. And I know,
please say it again. Because I think people need to hear that again.
No matter, and this was a big one I had to accept, no matter what I did or didn't do, it did not impact or change how people chose to treat me, respect me, value me, understand me, love me, and whatnot. And I know, obviously, I've spoken earlier on about making the tough decision about ending a relationship of mine that I did not want to end.
Yeah.
But honestly, was the best decision I could have ever made for myself. And a big part of that was really me coming face to face with myself in regards to how much of who I was in that relationship was a people pleaser versus me just existing on myself and knowing that whatever it is that I'm receiving, I'm deserving of everything, one, that is free and accessible, but then also in understanding that that person's choice to love me the way they did or not love me the way I deserved or treat me the way they did or not treat me the way I deserved really had nothing to do with what I was doing or not doing.
Exactly.
But the biggest aspect of it actually comes from, it had a lot to do with their own level of health, with their own relationship with themselves. So when you now think about it from that perspective, you're like, wow.
Everything starts to become clear.
Delusional cycle of people pleasing.
Girl.
When it even has nothing to do with us.
With me. Right. It has nothing to do with you. Everyone's just reacting based off how they feel internally. And that's just facts.
I would say that was probably one of the biggest life bomb
aha moments.
And I would absolutely reference this book because I keep telling everybody about it. This book on boundaries.
It's the boundaries one. We recommended it last time.
Yeah, Good Boundaries and Goodbyes by Lisa Turkers. I think that's her name, because I started, and it's funny because in that relationship, of course, I knew something was just going on with me. It wasn't even just about the relationship.
Yes.
And I started reading the book, and a lot of things just started becoming very evident to me that as much as we see glimpses here and there, like we said already, that people might be accepting or people might be validating or people are sort of having reactions to our people-pleasing behaviors.
Yeah.
The truth is, no one is going to tell you to set boundaries with them.
Nope.
Because they don't benefit from your people-pleasing to some degree, if you think about it.
No.
So a lot of times when we find ourselves seeing people not necessarily kind of going like, whoa, Aisha, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
We don't realize to a large extent that it's because we're giving them access to different aspects of ourselves that they haven't fully earned. Or they haven't fully even shown if they are capable of being able to show up in that way.
Yeah.
But for us, because we kind of see it as our responsibility and what we're supposed to do, because for us to be able to attain this thing, I have to do this and whatnot and blah, blah, blah. We don't actually truly see where people are at and just how capable they are of being able to really give us what we need.
Yeah. You know what? Thank you for sharing. I'm being very vulnerable because as you were talking, I was just thinking about it. You are too focused on other people that we don't even realize that they're not in a position to even validate us in the first place. You know, they've not done their own work. They're struggling internally as well. There's things that they're projecting as well. And imagine now having this clarity and reflecting back. You just sit down and be like, how could I have done that? Like, how could I have given this person so much power and hold over me? Oh.
I've been going through that. I kid you not. And it's almost, I think that's where
it's normal part of the process.
Grief as well. Like the consequence, part of the consequence of really seeing how much we put ourselves through.
Yeah.
And we don't even assess, like you said, if even what we're putting ourselves through is even for people who are capable. Or people who also understand the value of what we're bringing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Paula. And I'm so glad that you're being honest about the grieving process as well, because it does take time. Yeah. And you do have to be compassionate with yourself. You do have to recognize that, like, don't be too critical on yourself, because sometimes it's just like, how could I have done that? How could I have put myself in such situations? But like we're saying, it takes time, it takes process. The most important part is once you're aware, just continue doing the work because it will show up in other situations. You just have to be able to catch yourself to kind of engage in more productive behavior or less people-pleasing behavior, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to also just ask if there are other short-term or long-term consequences that are also coming to mind too as well for you as we're having this conversation.
I think because when you were talking about the overextending yourself, I think one short term that could also lead to long term is just emotional fatigue. Just being tired because you're consistently meeting other people's needs.
That is so true.
Because you're meeting their needs so much, you're not meeting your own needs. So that's your self-care, like you're saying, quality of life is suffering. And that in turn kind of extends to your long-term mental health. Like you just start developing things like depression, anxiety, because you're just neglecting your own emotions from pleasing other people. So that's one that came to me because that's kind of connected with saying no. Always saying yes, 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 yes. Ugh, I know I'm a recovering yes person. So now when I talk about boundaries and everything, I'm always telling people my favorite word is no because I will say no and I will not feel bad about saying no because it's something that I want. But for a long time, I'll say yes and then feel bad that I said yes. Then I will know, I'll be aware that saying yes was a mistake. Then I'll not be thinking about ways to get out of it. And then I'll start feeling bad for thinking about ways to get out of it. And I'll end up doing it and then I'll be exhausted. That cycle is so frustrating. And it's so irritating. Real. I know. It's so freaking irritating.
And in the famous words of, I was going to say our friend, Shonda Rhimes. No is a full sentence.
It is, N-O, full stop, period. Period. But also, do you know another thing I thought about is resentment. Then you start resenting people. But really what's happening is internally you're not happy with yourself. So it's easy to project that onto other people.
Because you're neglecting you.
Yeah, you're neglecting yourself. So resentment will not lead to self-hate, will not lead to identity issues. Will not lead to you cosplaying different identities because you don't really know who you are. And every time you're going to be disappointed because it doesn't feel like you. So you're spending a lot of time.
You know something interesting about what you just said, Aisha?
What?
Is that to some degree, people pleasing actually makes, how do I put this? It shows people how they should treat us.
If you think really about does. It really
shows
does.
people what we're willing to accept and what we're willing to... Well, I was going to say what we're not willing to accept, but no, it actually shows people what we're willing to accept.
Please don't trigger me because... Please do not trigger me.
It really does
right.
show people. Because if you think about it, like you were saying, like it's neglecting self. But with the hopes that by doing things, others would not neglect you. But what you're showing other people is that I am okay with neglecting myself. So I hope that you would not neglect me or you will not sort of show up this way or you not do all of these things or treat me this way. But other people see how you treat yourself.
Right.
So to a large extent, we always wonder why like we need to keep doing more. It's because to a large extent, they see it and they're like, okay, that's the level to which you're willing to accept.
If you are going to accept that, who am I to give you more?
Who am I to give you more? That's the real question.
Abina, who am I to give you more if if the bar is this low? I have to make that bar lower and worse. You know?
And you know, to a large extent, there's this notion where people are kind of, and I guess we can talk about this, where we confuse kindness as people pleasing, we confuse being a good person. Like, I cannot just, how many conversations have I had with clients where it's like, how can you expect me to say no? That's going to make them feel this way. I cannot, that's not who I am. That's not my value and that's not my belief. And a lot of people use that a lot. Or also this thin line between genuine care but then unhealthy self-sacrifice. Why do we think that we as human beings are so confused about the differences between people pleasing versus being kind or being a good person?
I think because we want to be perceived as good people. When people think about us, we want them to remember, Aisha did that good thing for me that time, or she's a good girl. You know, the things I've heard sometimes that make me laugh. If Aisha has $10 in her account, she'll give me all that $10. But you, but if Aisha reflects, if she needs $10, everybody will say they don't have. Do you get? So people always, they want that validation of being perceived as a good people. As human beings, we are obsessed of people's perceptions of us. We are so obsessed with it.
We are.
And it's
We've
like,
been
who
conditioned
cares?
to be obsessed.
We have been. It's who cares? Honestly, truly, once you start becoming more aware and you start loving yourself, you start understanding and creating values for yourself. You start separating the need to validate people and being comfortable with your own decisions, beliefs, and values. So I really think that's what it is. What do you think?
No, that is such an excellent point that you make there, honestly speaking, that a lot of that has to do with this self-perception or other people's perceptions of us.
Yeah.
And to a large extent, I was even trying to just even see, like, what does kindness mean? Like, if we're actually kind of breaking it down. And Google says it's the quality of being gentle and caring and helpful, right, to some degree. And we're like, okay, so where did we learn that kindness means being gentle, caring, and helpful to others, but not to self? It really lets us start to see to a large extent how other-oriented, I don't know if that's a word, we are as human beings, are not really self-oriented. So I always ask my clients, I'll put it this way, I'll say, how do you feel about this in relation to, is you in relation to your world? Is you in relation to people? Is you in relation to your work? Is you in relation to your family and whatnot? As opposed to other people in relation to us.
To you.
And it kind of goes back to the notion of what we were already saying earlier as well, that if people aren't seeing you be kind to yourself, what makes you think that is going to make them go, okay, she's not kind to herself, or let me just show kindness. I'm not saying that there are not people like that exist. But my point just being more so the mental filtering that is there is so off that we don't realize that a lot of what's happening with us internally and the relationship we have with self really
so important.
Reflects and projects to how other people also see us, but then also the kind of value that people think we place, we place our value on. But I get
you make an
I get
accurate
that religion and faith too as well can play a very big role, but there's a very big difference. I always say there's a big difference between extending grace and having boundaries.
Agreed.
You can extend grace while having
with
boundaries. It's not
a
this or that situation. You can also extend grace from afar. You can extend grace whilst you being very firm in you understanding that your needs in this case are important, and you knowing that advocating for yourself does not make you an ingenuous person or someone who's a good person
or a mean,
or someone
evil person
who understands the value of their existence in the first place.
Preach. Paula is preaching, guys. 5 stars, 10 stars, 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. You're really preaching. Okay, so since we're talking about people extending grace to themselves and starting to break this cycle of people pleasing, what are some practical steps or techniques for setting boundaries and breaking the habit of people pleasing?
No, that's a very good question. I can speak from just my own experience. But then I can also obviously just speak in general too as well. I think a big aspect of really, I don't want to call it, is it healing from people or recovering from people pleasing, is really understanding what your boundaries are in relation to yourself. Boundaries are not for people. It's not for anybody. It's for us.
Period.
I think we kind of go off this mentality where we set boundaries for people as opposed to we set boundaries within ourselves in relation to people, in relation to situations. And to a large extent, what that really helps us do is we start to see, and there's this whole thing I've been talking about lately of like being my own compass in how I navigate my world versus other people being my own compass, so to speak, in how I navigate my world. But to a large extent, that comes with you being able to believe that you are capable and you are competent. And that's why self-esteem is a very big aspect of people pleasing too as well. So I would highly, highly recommend therapy.
Agreed.
In you being able to start to understand who you are, start to develop an authentic, honest, and intimate relationship with yourself. Being able to understand who you are, what makes you you, what your likes are, your dislikes are, what your non-negotiables are, what your negotiables are. But being able to understand that these things are not things that are luxury or things that we need to work to earn or be deserving of. As long as you're existing and you're a human being, we are all deserving of this and we all have access to this. So to a large degree, I really think that recovering from people pleasing really does come with taking that space and that time, or taking that energy and that time and effort that's being put in other people into yourself. Into really understanding who you are, but building a level of intimacy with oneself that it makes you so aware of your needs that it's hard for you not to see when those needs are either not being met or those needs are being violated or taken advantage of. And then actually trusting that you're someone who is capable of either communicating, advocating for yourself, but also making the adjustments when things don't feel right. And I'll just share this. My friend was sharing with me today in regards to just, I think I mentioned already, like, I had a minor meltdown. I needed to reach out to a friend. I was too in my head and whatnot. So she reminded me and said, you don't remember this, or maybe you do remember this, but last year we had a conversation where you had told me how scared you were that you would not be able to leave your relationship because you'll be stuck. And it was not about the relationship, it was the fear of like, I'm going to be stuck. I don't want to be stuck in a relationship. And she's like, I think you need to really trust that you would know when something is not working for you, when something is working for you, and trust that you're going to be able to make the right decision for yourself. So fast forward to this morning, she reached out to me and said, do you remember this? We spoke about this. And guess what? You made that decision. You knew when it wasn't working for you. You knew when your needs were being violated. You knew what was happening in the sense where the version of yourself was more concerned about the well-being of others and this person than your own self. And you were able to identify when it was time for you to make that change. So to a large extent, I think sometimes seeing our own ability, whether it's evidence, now we do evidence questioning of ways in which we have made choices for ourselves in the past that we didn't think were choices that we would have made, but we advocated for ourselves. It makes us actually feel more confident that we are actually capable.
We're capable of these things. Wow. Thank you for sharing. In all I'm going to summarize that is to say you need to trust yourself. Once you're doing the work, you need to trust yourself. Because there's no way you're going to be able to, let me rephrase it. You are going to have some lapses. There's going to be moments where you still engage in previous behaviors, but that's part of the process. But again, you have to trust yourself to remove yourself again from those situations, because that's how you learn, not only learn more about yourself, but learn about your boundaries, learn about what you like, learn about your needs, and become more comfortable and confident in setting these boundaries and doing things for you. And just to put it out there, we're not saying don't do things for people who are be kind, but we're saying don't do it at the expense of your own well-being and your own mental health. And
because that expense is typically where dysfunction grows. That at the expense is typically where you're anxious, you're angry, you're resentful, you're irritable, you're depressed, you're sort of going through so much that honestly is not helpful for your quality of life.
And we want everyone to have good quality of life, or a quality of life that they're content with or they're consistently working on. So beautiful conversation. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable. And I'm very proud of you. I just want to end the conversation with saying I am really proud of you. You have done a lot of work, continue to do work, but
thank you.
You're doing really well as a recovering people pleaser.
Thank you. I am proud of myself too.
Good job.
If I'm being honest, I knew I would see the day, but then I also never really thought that I would see the day. And I think sometimes what makes me see the healthier mindset that I'm in and whatnot, it really helps me also see that who we are today is not necessarily who we're going to be tomorrow. And if we're able to kind of trust that process too as well, maybe to a large extent, we can also all be recovering people pleasers.
And so we want to keep having this conversation with our listeners. We want to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your experiences. And we would like you to do that by connecting with us, whether via email at info@dwhyapodcast.com or Instagram or X, formerly known as Twitter, as DWHYA Podcast, or TikTok at DWHYA Podcast 1. Yeah, what a beautiful conversation.
Yes. Shout out to us.
Shout out to us. We hope that this would start the journey of somebody breaking the cycle of people-pleasing behavior.
And on that note, can I get an amen?
Amen.
With that being said, thank you for listening to us. Until next time, stay cool, stay relaxed, stay blessed.
Stay healthy. Bye.
Stay healthy. Bye.